All right, Angelica, I'll pass over to you. I think we're ready to go.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Angelica Quesada, and I'm the Research and Evaluation Person at the John Humphrey Center for Peace and Human Rights. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this virtual space again. That is part of a series of writing relations education sessions. Um, and Writing Relations is a network, a pan-Canadian network that we, the John Humphrey Center, belong to. And the idea of Writing Relation is a women-led, heart-centered organization in which adult educators and community organizers get together to learn from each other, to support each other, and educate each other, which is something that people who work at non-for-profit organizations or are community organizer or adult educators don't usually have the space to do. So in that effort of learning from each other, we have Ruth Ann Weeks, who is part of our Writing Relations Edmonton Circle, and she has offered to share with us her knowledge on leadership and community organizing, and so this is the second part, the second talk that she's offering to us. Before passing it to her, I want to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory. We are here. John Humphrey Center is in Edmonton, Amaskochi, Muskegon, and we want to recognize that we live in Canada and internally colonized country that has had a history, but it also has a present of colonial injustices, and that our intent, everything we do it with the acknowledgement that exists, and that we are committed to promoting change and changing that reality of injustices. So I am passing it to Ruth Ann now, and I will let you go ahead. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. And if I have the chat box here, please feel free to interact with us, and I will be checking. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Angelica, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and share with you some information on how to stay safe and healthy emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. It's really important. You're all servants, and today is about you and slowing down and taking some time to pay attention to your own mental health and your own journey. And my name is Ruth Ann Weeks, as Angelica said, and my business is Harmony in the Workplace, and I am all about corporate social innovation. So I work with organizations to help them improve their corporate culture and address issues related to psychological safety and violence and harassment prevention in the workplace. And what drew me to Writing Relations is the heart-centered approach and the radical social change that is the messaging, because I really believe that we are in a social shift. Our level of awareness globally is improving and increasing, and it's going to take all of us working together to elevate that and just to really operate from a place of love. So I'm going to start off by sharing a personal story with you. When I was in the midst of my own mental health struggles, I didn't recognize it as such. I'm a natural born planner. It's just the way I'm hardwired. I can't not look to the future. You say control freak, I say visionary. I like to know what's coming my way, to foresee the changing tides and currents so I can prepare to navigate the waterways of life. The problem with that is, much like real waterways, life is unpredictable. As is often the way, what's happening in our minds ends up manifesting in our bodies, and I got quite sick. Furthermore, I was embarrassed by my illness and kept it to myself. I didn't even share what was happening with my partner, and we were living together. I did my best to hide it, and my symptoms intensified and started to really interfere with my quality of life. I finally got the help that I needed and went to see a doctor. I was sick enough that my general practitioner got me an appointment with a specialist the next day for a scope, and I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. As an autoimmune disease, its origins are unknown, but it is connected to stress, and that made sense. My partner and I just moved across Canada from New Brunswick to Alberta with our life savings of $4,000 to start a new life. And although I'd been fortunate enough to find a job right away, my husband was still recovering from a serious motor vehicle accident, and he was struggling to find employment with his new physical limitations. We had a house for sale back east, and our debt was mounting just to cover our monthly expenses. So I knew that I had ulcerative colitis now, but that, naming it did little to make me well. It's a disease that's incurable except by surgery. And the symptoms can sometimes be managed by immune blocking drugs that can be hard on the body. The first med we tried negatively affected my central nervous system, and we had to abort that. The second was damaging my liver, and my symptoms were just getting worse and worse as they manifested outside of my colon into other parts of my body. I experienced debilitating joint pain and golf ball size lumps in my legs. We were discussing surgery because none of the meds were working. And, I really wanted to avoid that because it means a colostomy bag and significant recovery period. And it was at that point that I experienced a spiritual awakening. And I had a mental shift that helped me avoid surgery and get my disease under control. I let go. I experienced a mental shift. I let go of my desire to have it all figured out. I let go of my desire to control the outcome. It was the beginning of a journey to health through an intentional and mindful release of the stress that had been crushing me. Now, does that mean that I've not experienced stress in my life since then? Hardly. I've started a business from scratch, been dealing with my aging parents and supporting them, and I have a teenager at home. And despite all of those stressors, my condition only flares. It's only flared once in the past 5 years. And that was related to this whole COVID crisis. It was about 2 months ago in response to everything I had on my agenda being canceled or postponed in relation to COVID-19. The flare didn't last long, and I was quite quickly able to get it under control. But it had been so long since I'd had symptoms that it was disheartening to know that just as quickly as my defeated thoughts again showed up in my mind, they showed up in my body. So, I may experience a flare up again. I knew it was an incurable disease, but I still had hoped that I was cured. So I'd much rather do the work and stay grounded in my self-care regime that consists of regular meditation, mindfulness practices, exercise, nature walks, along with spiritual practices and an intentional letting go of what I can't control and a deep-seated knowing that everything is going to work out. It's going to work out for the good, and that I'm loved and that I'm cared for, just as you are. So next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about maintaining health in these areas of mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, as well as our physical health, while serving the vulnerable populations that we work with. Next slide. So let's start by practicing some deep breathing together. So everybody get comfortable in your chair, please. Rest your hands either on the arm of the chair or in your lap. Place your feet flat on the floor. Get comfortable. Feel supported in your seat. Drop your tongue from the roof of your mouth. Close your eyes and just inhale through your nose and let it out with an audible sigh. You can feel the stress just drain. Let's do that 2 more times together. In through the nose. I don't know about you, but when I do that and take the time to do that, I feel the tension from my head and my jaw and my upper back all just kind of melt away. And, You know, it's just when we take the time to practice deep breathing like that, it sends a message to our brains that we're safe and that all is well. And you'll be well served to use it. It's just a really simple deep breathing exercise as a quick way to de-stress throughout the day. So I encourage you to do that. Next slide, please. So who here doesn't have mental health? Anybody? Right? Of course, we all do. It's about how we think, how we feel and act, how we react or cope with things that are happening in our lives, the good things and the not so good things that can cause us stress, anxiety, worry, and strife. Optimal mental health is when we're in balance and feel satisfied. We're at peace and we have a feeling of contributing to our workplace, to our society, and to our loved ones and our families. Declining and poor mental health is when something changes and we aren't able to cope as well with stressors. It can lead to anxiety and declining physical health, as was with my case, disease, dis-ease. It's caused very often, not always obviously, but very often by stresses that are happening in our mind. Many of our illnesses are attributed to what's happening in our mind. When someone is struggling with their mental health, they may appear perfectly fine, at least for my partner didn't even know what was wrong with me. He knew I wasn't optimal, but I hadn't shared, so he didn't know. When mental illness is in play, thinking, mood, and or behavior is changed and is associated with substantial distress or general dysfunction. And although we all feel anxious, worried, or stressed at times, with mental illness, these feelings are relatively constant and they greatly affect the quality of life for the sufferer. Mental illness is formally diagnosed by a mental health professional. Next slide. So it's important to acknowledge that our mental health is on a continuum. It's the rare person who's thriving mentally all the time. Although hopefully we will seek help before we get to crisis mode, no one is immune, and we are wise to be aware of not only where we are in the continuum, but where those around us might be as well. So when we're thriving, you know, we all know what this looks like. We're laughing, you know, we have a support system in place that we're leaning on and connecting with. We maintain healthy relationships within our own family units and within our circle. We're happy, we're resilient, we're feeling joyful. And then stress, you know, when stress affects us, and I mean, we live in a stressful world, we can't get away from it, but we can control how we let it affect us long term. We become anxious, worried, we have self-doubt. Sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're angry because seems like there's just so many problems in the world and we want to fix them. When we're struggling mentally, we'll isolate. We'll feel hopeless. Sometimes we'll feel like a burden. We'll have obsessive thoughts. We tend to focus on the negative, which may be factual, but we can sometimes catastrophize that and give it more power. Our relationships start to suffer because we just don't have the energy to maintain them or help them grow. We have lack of supports because we're isolating. And then, you know, if we're not careful, that can lead us to a crisis situation where we're self-harming, either cutting or substance abuse, or, you know, even with food, we can self-harm. We may have panic attacks, may have some suicidal ideations or manic episodes. Someone could be experiencing, pardon me, I need a drink. Someone could be experiencing some of these symptoms of stress, struggle, and crisis without anyone even knowing. Their loved ones may recognize that they're not thriving and happy, but they may have no idea how much the person is really struggling. It's like an iceberg. You know, they only see part of the stress, where underneath it's huge, it's big, and it's sometimes crushing us if we're not careful. The person struggling may be embarrassed or ashamed that they're not coping well. Nobody wants to be labeled as someone who's weak or not contributing. We've been talking many years about removing the stigma around mental health, and thankfully those walls are coming down and people are increasingly able to talk about what they're experiencing. Millennials and Gen Z are especially comfortable talking about their mental health. I'll get a little bit more into that later. But they've grown up into a world where they're constantly stimulated and their attention is pulled in different directions all the time. We're living in an age where we need to be intentional about giving our brains a rest. We also live in a country where it's dark a considerable part of the year, and seasonal affective disorder is quite common in our Canadian winters. Taking vitamin D and using special lights to stimulate the sunlight can help. Now we're in our springtime right now. We're starting to see the sun and more light in the world, and that's a good thing, but that's just something to be mindful of if you start to feel a little blue or down in the wintertime. Next slide. The cost associated with lost productivity is $6.3 billion. So our research, we know that over 500,000 Canadian employees are unable to work every week due to mental health. And the cost associated with lost productivity for that is $6.3 billion just in Canada. While that's staggering, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the $50 billion annual cost associated with mental health to the Canadian economy. It's huge. And the more the stigmas come down, the more people are sharing and able to verbalize what's happening, but the support system is still not there. So we really need to keep bringing it to the forefront of awareness so we can get the infrastructure in place to support those that are experiencing mental health struggles. Next slide. I thought this was really interesting. It's a brand new statistic, came out in January of this year. 77% of Canadian employees would consider leaving their current organization for the same pay if their new workplace offered better supports for their personal well-being. Now, this doesn't just mean mental health. It means, all well-being supports. So things like benefit packages and having benefits that are tailored to specific needs. Benefit companies are really starting to think outside the box. Not everybody needs the same one-size-fits-all benefit package. And 60% would take a position with less pay if it meant that there was just better supports for their personal well-being. And that usually includes their family well-being as well. So, that's staggering that 60% would take a pay cut just to have a better work environment and better supports. Next slide. So yeah, I told you we'd come back to this. So I'm going to talk a bit here about the multi-generational workforce we find ourselves in. For decades now, my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, have been pushing and breaking down the stigma around mental health. I think we've had some success because millennials and Gen Zers are for the most part okay talking about their mental health. They acknowledge that mental health affects us all and that supports are important. That's a win. Breaking down those barriers and bringing it to the forefront of awareness, that's a win. So boomers, they're born between 1946 and 1964. They're currently aged 51 to 74. And, they make up 23% of our workforce right now, and the majority will be retiring within the next 10 to 15 years. Gen X's, born between 65 and 79. They're currently between 40 and 54 years old. It's 82 million people in America. Gen Y, or millennials, were born between 1980 and 1996. They're currently 29 to 39 years old. And Gen Z, 1996 to the mid-2014s, currently age 6 to 24, graduating and entering the workforce now. So they're the ones that are now graduating from the post-secondary organizations and entering our workforce now. So the generation born after the mid 2014s is the alpha generation. And I don't know if you've heard, but there's a new term for the next generation after that, and they're called the colonials, and they should be born in about 7 months or so. So it's just really interesting how the generations affect and shape our culture. So like I said, the newest generation entering the workforce, Gen Z, they want to work for organizations who care about them and care about society. Millennials and Gen Z are the ones currently driving societal change. Elimination of plastic straws, surge in thrift store shopping because it's good for the environment. And they're the ones driving the changing workplace dynamics related to fairness, equality, and diversification. Adopting an abuse-free organizational culture will assure that innovative and fresh ideas come to your organization in the form of newly graduated recruits. So yeah, I'd be really interested to know if you're willing to share, those of us in the room, there's 40 of us, just put which generation you are. If you're a boomer, Gen X, millennial, Gen Z, there might even be some alphas here that were born after 2014. I'd be really interested to know how many of each are in the room. Just interesting. Yeah, so a lot of Gen X, mostly millennials as well. Good. Awesome. Yeah, I'll take a look at that later. It's just, I'm just interested in that. Oh, we got a boomer. Yay, Margarita. That's awesome. I'm married to a boomer. Yeah, it all started with you guys, you kind of started to push the agenda. Because if you look at the values, anti-war, optimists, involvement, questioning, that's when things really started to change, actually, was with the boomers. And then it's just progressively got more and more progressive as we've gone on. So, okay, next slide, please. Return on investment. Yeah, so when it comes to, was that the next one? Yes, sorry, I apologize, I lost my place. Okay, yeah. So Deloitte released a study on return on investment for dollars spent on workplace wellness programs. When it comes to trying to transform cultures and get them on board, they like to see the numbers. So they want to know their money's being well spent. So initially, on every dollar spent on organizational wellness, the initial return on investment is $1.62. So it's a good investment right off the hop. That return jumps to $2.18 for programs that have been in place for 3 years or more. And a proactive approach is best. So being proactive in implementing workplace wellness programs and instilling an environment of psychological safety where it's safe for workers to be authentic and vulnerable is always the best approach to workplace wellness. Next slide. So according to WebMD, a good way to think about mental and emotional health is like a tag team. So your mental health refers to your ability to process information. And emotional health, on the other hand, refers to your ability to express feelings, which are based upon the information that you've processed. So right now, in this disruption with COVID-19, how we've processed the cancellations, the reschedules, the layoffs, the lockdowns determines how we're feeling about things right now. Some of us are sad. Some of us are disappointed. Some of us are angry, hopeful, optimistic. Some of us are all these things throughout a day. Some of us are all these things throughout an hour. It depends on what's happening around us. So there are no wrong feelings. All feelings are valid, and nobody has any right to tell you what you feel is wrong or bad. Feel the feels and process them in healthy ways. That's how you move past them and don't become paralyzed by fear and anxiety. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel disappointed, but it doesn't mean you have to pitch a tent there. My coach has coached me and others that she works with to make an appointment with their disappointment and negative emotions. When I was struggling 2 months ago, as things started to get canceled in my work life and my personal life, and I, was not coping so well with that, I actually asked her about it, and she told me to do this because I know about manifestation. So I knew that my negative feelings and focusing on that and how disappointed I was keeping me from my dreams and from achieving my goals. But at the same time, I just couldn't seem to move past them. I just kept, trying to push them away, and they weren't going away. So this is what she told me to do. And it worked. So I recommend it for you as well. She said, make an appointment with your disappointment. Schedule it, no more than 15 minutes. So I actually scheduled the time, put it in your calendar. During this appointment with your disappointment or fear or anger, journal, cry, yell, or scream if you want to, and then close the book on that and refocus your attention on what it is you would love instead. So where the mind goes, the energy flows. Our thoughts are powerful, and we get to choose how we process them and act on them. And it really helps if we're self-aware. And there's something about journaling that really helps you get clear on what it is you're experiencing and what it is you're feeling. And it's almost like a release. It gets it out of you into some way that is tangible for you to see, and it's very therapeutic. Next slide. So we talked last time quite a bit about know yourself and know your team in the last session that I did, if any of you caught that. But this was just kind of a review about that. Emotional intelligence, know yourself. So self-management, control your impulses and behavior, manage emotions healthfully, take initiative in your own life. Self-awareness, the thoughts and behaviors related to the emotions. So remember, your thinking, your thoughts are how you process your thoughts is leading to your emotions. And then that, you think, you feel, you choose, and then you choose your thoughts and behaviors. So strengths and weaknesses, it affects your confidence. Be socially aware, empathy, emotional cues of others, social comfort, recognizing power dynamics in organizations, whether you agree with them or not. It's a structure that we have to at least be mindful and respectful of at times. Relationship management, develop and maintain good relationships. Communicate clearly, inspire and influence, teamwork, conflict management. Emotional intelligence is about knowing yourself. Next slide. This is also in review, and this is all I'm going to say about it here, but we often talk about trust at work and in our environment. So we trust the people that we're working with, whether they are volunteers or staff or coworkers. We trust them to be competent and professional. We trust that our staff and colleagues are going to show up to work every day and that they'll do a good job. And we trust that we're going to get paid. Psychological safety is a level above that trust, and it creates an environment where it's safe and encouraged to take interpersonal risk in expressing ideas, which leads to innovation and continuous ideas and continuous improvements. Psychological health and safety in an environment is a place that promotes workers' psychological well-being and actively works to prevent harm to workers' psychological health, including in negligent, reckless, or intentional ways. So let's talk more about trust. Next slide. It's important that we trust the people we work with. It's important that we trust them to do what they need to do to stay safe and healthy in the midst of this crisis. It's important that when we have employees working from home, that we trust them to do the work they've been assigned and not to watch TV or surf the internet all day or sleep until noon. We're in an environment of elevated risk right now, and it's important that we can recognize when those around us are struggling. If they trust you, then they're more likely to disclose when something is not right with them or if they are struggling themselves. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. This is what it can look like when someone is suffering or not doing so well. You know, individually, we talked about the continuum. Some of this was in there as they progressively get worse. But they withdraw. They may appear nervous. They may be distracted, tired. They may feel sad. They may abuse substances, and that might be drugs, alcohol, food. They may become explosive or moody. They may avoid you. They may avoid having conversations. They may avoid meetings. They may experience weight loss or weight gain. Within an organization, that might look like increased absenteeism, presenteeism. From a people management perspective, I think presenteeism is one of the scariest things about workplace safety, because the person is actually there, they're present, but they're completely checked out. Their mind is completely elsewhere. They're so overwhelmed with what's happening in their life and the stressors that they're experiencing that they're not focused on the task at hand. And you can get away with that for a while if you have a desk job. But imagine how dangerous that can be if you're driving a big rig or operating a piece of heavy equipment. That presenteeism piece is way more dangerous than absenteeism. Productivity goes down. There's incivility. Incivility is simply being kind and speaking in a respectful way. And if it's left unchecked in an organization, it can really quickly lead to a bullying, which is a real toxic component in any environment. Gossip. Don't talk about people, talk to people. Low morale can bring down the whole team. It can make the environment really tense. People are walking on eggshells because there's, someone who's unpredictable in the midst. And, it can lead to people committing suicide. And that's the last thing we want in our organizations, is to find out when it's too late that someone has been struggling with their mental health. Next slide. So looking for options and opportunities to come alongside someone and support them. So when it's a coworker or a peer, ask them how they're doing. Don't gossip about them or judge them. Remember I said talk to them, not about them. Be supportive. Respect their privacy. They might not want to talk to you. They might not want to disclose even that there is something wrong. And if they do disclose that there's something wrong, they might not want to talk about any details. But sometimes it's just about the best way to be a support is just to say, hey, I just want you to know that if and when you ever do want to talk, I'm here and I care about you. Sometimes that's great. And I can't imagine anybody hearing that and not being thankful that they've got someone in their corner. Include them. We talked about the isolation piece. Sometimes when people are struggling mentally, they just don't have the stamina or the motivation to go to social things, social gatherings, that kind of thing. But it doesn't mean they don't want to be invited, right? So keep inviting them, include them. Don't get discouraged if, they keep saying no. Keep including them, keep inviting them, because one of these times, when they're doing well, they may be really happy to be included and to step out. Be empathetic. That's just understanding, an understanding of where someone is at. Don't diagnose them and don't try to fix it. People don't want to be fixed. And if they do want to be fixed, they want to be fixed by a professional, not someone who just thinks they have all the answers. So if you're in a supervisory role and you see someone struggling, the first thing we want to do is check your bias. Now, if you were in the last session, we spent a bit of time talking about bias, the unconscious bias and the conscious bias. So we all have bias, and if you did miss the session, just know that there is a recording that you can access if you're interested. So we all have bias, and the idea is to move from the unconscious bias to a conscious bias, so that we can craft our reaction and our actions around that. And I see there's some action in this chat, and I just want you to know that although I can't read while I'm presenting, I am very interested, and I will be recording that or capturing that and looking at that later. So be relational, listen to understand, seek first to understand and then to be understood. That's Stephen Covey. So practice active listening, put down the phone, don't look at your computer, don't be typing, look someone in the eyes and be present while they're sharing with you. Someone who's isolated might only have a place to share at work. So be accommodating if you can. Be respectful, member of their wishes, let them take the lead. Be patient with them and build that culture of trust. If you're operating from an organizational culture of psychological safety, they're going to feel free and willing and able to share when they want to, and know that they're not going to be judged as weak or stupid or anything else like that. Next slide. Maya Angelou, very wise woman. She said, "I think we all have empathy. We may not have enough courage to display it." So trust, courage, and empathy all go hand in hand. We just talked about trust. Empathy is the ability to come alongside of someone with understanding of what it feels like to be hurt or scared or afraid. It doesn't mean that we've experienced the exact same thing that the other person has experienced, although we may have. But it means that we have a level of awareness and understanding to be a supportive influence for them without trying to fix what's wrong or justify it or even to talk about it if they don't want to. Sometimes the best way to show support is to simply tell someone that you're there for them, that you understand how hard this must be for them, and that you will listen if they want to talk, or that you will simply sit with them if they don't. Remember, we talked about feelings and how all feelings are valid. When somebody is in crisis or has experienced trauma, they may just want to hear, "Wow, that must have been a really hard thing to deal with. That must be really scary, sad, lonely, frustrating," just whatever you think it might be that they're experiencing and going through. And that it's okay to name the feeling that they may be having. And if they feel like sharing, it may open them up to talk about their feelings themselves rather than feeling, keeping all their feelings all stuffed. So there was really something really interesting that I read on social media the other day, and the author is unknown, but I'm going to read it to you because I just thought it was such a really profound thing. And I had it open on my phone, and of course now it's not, but I will find it quite quickly because I know exactly where it is. And I thought it was a really profound description of the situation that we find ourselves in right now. And it really, I thought it was really great to go with this empathy piece. So we are not in the same boat. I heard that we're all in the same boat, but it's not like that. We're all in the same storm, but not the same boat. Your ship could be shipwrecked and mine might not be, or vice versa. For some, quarantine is optimal, a moment of reflection, of reconnection, easy in flip-flops with a cocktail or a coffee. For others, this is a desperate financial and family crisis. For some that live alone, they're facing endless loneliness. Well, for others, it is peace rest, and time with their mother, father, sons, and daughters. With the $600 weekly increase in unemployment, some are bringing in more money to their households than when they were working. Others are working more hours for less money due to pay cuts or loss in sales. Some families of 4 just received $3,400 from the stimulus, while other families of 4 saw $0. Some were concerned about getting a certain candy for Easter, while others were concerned if there would be enough bread, milk, and eggs for the weekend. Some want to go back to work because they don't qualify for unemployment and are running out of money. Others want to kill those who want to break quarantine. Some are home, spending 2 to 3 hours a day helping their children with online schooling, while others are spending 2 to 3 hours a day to educate their children on top of a 10 to 12-hour workday. Some have experienced the near death of the virus. Some have already lost someone from it, and some are not sure if their loved ones are going to make it. Others don't believe it's a big deal. Some have faith in God and expect miracles during this 2020. Others say the worst is yet to come. So friends, we are not in the same boat. We are going through a time with our perceptions and needs are completely different. Each of us will emerge in our own way from this storm. It's very important to see beyond what is seen at first glance, not just looking, but actually seeing. We are all on different ships during this storm, experiencing a very different journey. Realize that and be kind. Author unknown. Whoa. Excuse me. This is Kramer. Here's to feeling good all the time. That must have been next on her page. So anyway, sorry about that. Okay, next slide. So communication, did you just show the answers? Communication is more than using words. As a matter of fact, most of our communication is nonverbal. Like 80% of the way we communicate is nonverbal communication. So this is just, you know what, it's just a little game. They're not incredibly difficult pictorials here to play with, but let's just play a little game to practice our skills at reading nonverbal cues. So type your answer in the chat and we'll see how we are at guessing what this little person might be feeling. Someone is unmuted. Okay, so just type in the chat the number that corresponds with the little person that may be feeling sly or sneaky. Okay, I'm not going to tell you the answers this time. It's on the next slide. So looking at these faces, what do you think she might look like when she's feeling sad? Interesting. What about surprised? What might surprised look like? How about angry? Most of you are really good at this. And which one is our happy person? And what about, feeling maybe content or just engaged, present, paying attention. Cool. Okay, next slide. So yeah, I mean, you know, some of these, like 1 could be happy as well. 2 is like laughing. So that's sort of the way that goes. But so yeah, communication, it's more about words. It's paying attention to the way people's expressions are and what they could be experiencing. Next slide. Good job, everybody. I think most of you got them. And again, you know, there were some that could have more than one meaning. So we've established trust and we're operating from empathy. Let's look at ways to provide support, not only to others, but to support our own health and well-being also. Next slide. So do you remember this slide from earlier? We talked about stress. So when we're feeling anxious, worried, we're having self-doubts in our own abilities, sadness, anger, dis-ease. So I talked about, let's unpack the effects of stress that they have on us and how we can mitigate some of those effects. Next slide. When we live with high stress all the time and our body chemistry is affected, that stress can lead to disease. For me, it showed up in my gastrointestinal system. There was other things going on with me at the same time as well. I was carrying a lot of tension in my jaw, and I ended up, you know, having to get a bite plane, and yeah, I was quite a mess at that point in my life. For others, you know, it's high blood pressure, muscle tension, pain, grinding teeth. They might be impotent. So there's some ways, some simple ways to mitigate the stress effect. So get enough sleep. We all know that we need between 7 and 9 hours of sleep for optimal health. Regular exercise. I got up and went for my walk at 6 o'clock this morning. I enjoy walks later on in the day, but I do find that if I sometimes don't get them in early in the day, I don't get them in. So regularly exercise. We can't go to the gym. If you usually go to the gym, then, you know, maybe you need to do what you can at home, move the way you can. If, you know, maybe that's in a chair, maybe that's, you know, working with soup cans in your kitchen. Maybe it's dancing around your kitchen. Maybe it's, you know, dancing around your house, chair dancing. You know, we could have a virtual chair dancing party right now. And sometimes it's just about moving, especially now. I find now that I'm working from home, I mean, I have a home office all the time, but now that I'm not going out as much, I'm spending much more time in my chair and it's bothering my back. And yeah, thank you for sharing. There's some great ideas here. And I appreciate that, because I was going to actually ask you to do that, ways that you practice self-care. So that's great. Some great ideas here. So seek social support. You know, that might be seeing a neighbor and having a, over the fence talk, or a driveway party. You know, we entertained for the first time since quarantine on Friday. We had friends come over who, she's a nurse and she practices PPE pretty diligently, and they keep to themselves. So we decided to have a socially distanced fire, and we, you know, spent some time together. Simply accepting that things are out of your control and just having some faith that things are going to work out. I know for me that was huge. Keep your entertainment light. Watch funny things on TV. I just have found myself lately just going to Netflix and just plugging in comedies. And, you know, don't tell anybody, but sometimes it's the PG-13 stuff, or even, you know, just the Disney movies and stuff like that, because some of them are funny and they're just kind of mindless and check out and light. Meditate. So that might be a guided meditation. It might just be quieting your mind. It might just be sitting still. Eat healthy foods. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how our diet and what we put into our bodies really can affect our mental health as well as our physical health. Journal. Yeah, I saw someone say here in the chat, write things down. It really is freeing. Listen to music. I love music. And I actually, when I wrote out part of my self-care regime, listening to music daily was one of the things that was really important to me that I wanted to do. And I try most days. Every day I don't get there, but most days. Dance. Yeah, you know, sometimes when the music moves you, you just got to dance. And setting healthy boundaries. There's a new term coming out. Remember, we're talking about socializing. So I don't know if you guys have heard this, and I'm not condoning alcohol as a coping mechanism. Don't misread this. But people are actually getting together online and having quarantinis. They're determining ahead of time what kind of cocktails they want to make and getting the ingredients, and then having quarantinis online. So anyway, I just thought that was a cute little thing to do. Next slide. So the last bullet in the last slide was to set healthy boundaries. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. Quarantine. That's a great idea. Quarantinis and quarantine. Yeah, of course. Whatever floats your boat, right? That's good. I'm glad you're thinking outside the box and doing that. So fences keep out predators, they deter thieves, and they mark property lines. Like fences, boundaries keep us safe. So we need to set boundaries with our families, with our employer, with our neighbors, and others that we encounter in our lives. So the next slide. So psychcentral.com has this list of 10 ways to better boundaries. I put the source there because I am largely just reading this. But I thought it was good stuff. So be direct. When you're setting boundaries, with some people, maintaining healthy boundaries doesn't require our direct and clear-cut dialogue. Usually this is the case if people are similar in their communication styles, in their views, in their personalities, and general approach to life as you are. But that's not always the case. So with others, such as those who have different personality or cultural background, you'll need to be more direct about your boundaries. In romantic relationships or even friendships, individuals might need to talk about how much time they need to spend together for their own, or how much time they need to spend alone for their own sense of self. So name your limits. You can't set good boundaries if you're unsure where you stand. So identify your physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual limits. Consider what you can tolerate and accept and what makes you feel uncomfortable or stressed. There are no wrong feelings, so pay attention to what your limits are. Tune into your feelings. They're red flags or cues that our boundaries may be close. Discomfort or resentment. Resentment usually comes from feelings of being taken advantage of or not appreciated. It's often a sign that we're pushing ourselves either beyond our own limits because we feel guilty and we want to be a good daughter, wife, for instance, or someone else is imposing their expectations, views, or values on us. When someone acts in a way that makes us feel uncomfortable, that's a cue to us that they may be violating or crossing a boundary. Give yourself permission. Fear, guilt, and self-doubt are big potential pitfalls. We might wonder if we even deserve to have boundaries in the first place. Boundaries aren't just a sign of a healthy relationship. They're a sign of self-respect. And like I said last time, well-adjusted people will respect that you have boundaries and respect you more for it. Give yourself the permission to set boundaries and work to preserve them. Practice self-awareness. Again, boundaries are all about identifying your feelings and honoring them. If you notice yourself slipping and not sustaining your boundaries, Congratulations for noticing, first of all, and explore what change may have occurred in you or in someone else that has you stretched beyond the limits that you've set. Consider your past and your present. How we were raised, along with your role in the family, can become additional obstacles in setting and preserving boundaries. If you held a role of caretaker, you learn to focus on others. Okay, if you held the role of caretaker, you learn to focus your attention on others, letting yourself be drained emotionally or physically. Ignoring your own needs might have become the norm for you. Ask yourself, is there a healthy give and take in my relationships? Balanced relationships are reciprocal. Nobody's giving, or no one's giving all the time and no one's taking all the time. We've all had those people in our lives where just running into them and having a 10-minute conversation leaves us absolutely drained. That is not a reciprocal relationship. Work cultures can be challenging too. If your workday is 8 hours and your coworkers stay at least 10 to 11 hours, it can be challenging trying to maintain healthy boundaries. Tune into your feelings and needs, and honoring those becomes critical. Make self-care a priority, which also involves giving yourself permission to put yourself first. Self-care also means recognizing the importance of your feelings and honoring them. Just like on the airplane, when we need to put our own oxygen mask on first before we can help anybody else, we need to look at ourselves if we're going to be, we need to look after ourselves if we're going to be supportive to others. We can't serve anybody if our own cup is empty. Seek support. If you're having a hard time with boundaries, seek some help from a trusted friend, a faith community, or a professional therapist to get clear and get some tips on what healthy boundaries look like. Be assertive. It's not enough to create boundaries, we have to follow through. Even though we know intellectually that people aren't mind readers, we still expect others to know what it is that hurts us. Since they don't, it's important to assertively communicate with the other person when they've crossed a boundary. In a respectful way, let the other person know that let them know in particular what it is that's bothersome to you, so that you can work together to address it. Be clear in naming that behavior. Start small. Like any new skill, assertively communicating your boundaries takes practice. Professionals suggest starting with a small boundary that isn't threatening to you, and then incrementally increasing to more challenging boundaries. I'm just going to mute my mic for a second here where I clear my throat. Okay, next slide. We are what we eat. We've been hearing that, most of us, for most of our lives. And we all know that what we put into our bodies has a profound effect on our physical health. But did you know that it has just as much effect on our mental and emotional and spiritual health? Most of us are familiar with the term comfort food. A lot of the time, these traditional comforting foods are heavy, rich, and sugary. Think like things like pasta, chocolate, ice cream. Ice cream is so cliche. Every chick flick you ever see on television, whenever someone's heartbroken, what's the first thing they eat? Ice cream or booze and alcohol. While they may make us feel better for a while we are consuming them, these foods do nothing good for our health and end up making us feel worse in the long run. Furthermore, what we think about as we consume foods has an effect on our nutrient absorption. This was so profound to me when I heard this. I recently had the pleasure of hearing Dr. Carolyn Leaf in Calgary. She's a neuroscientist and such an interesting speaker. If you're interested in this topic, just look her up, Dr. Carolyn Leaf, L-E-A-F. She teaches that even the thoughts we have while we are consuming our food has an effect. If we're eating when we're so rushed or distracted or stressed about something, we only absorb about 30% of the nutrients in our food. So imagine if you're rushing around going through a drive-through to grab a burger and fries or a soft drink or whatever, and you're eating that unhealthy food while you're at a stoplight and you're really rushed and stressed, you're only absorbing about 30% of poor nutrition. So you're pretty much running on empty. Oh, Tabitha knows Dr. Leaf. Yay, whoop, whoop. We'll start a fan club. She's amazing. So we should learn to practice mindful eating. So what are some ways we can do that? Next slide. Be present, right? Be mindful. Just be present. Sit down. Don't eat anything while standing up. Put your fork down between bites and enjoy your food and chew it. You know, you can eat KD without chewing it. My 16-year-old told me that. It's not good. Chew your food. Breathe. Take your time. Again, when you're rushing, I mean, obviously you're not going to suffocate, but you're not necessarily practicing breathing properly for good digestion. Converse. Bring back the family dinners. I know here we're busy, even though we're quarantined together. My husband's out in his shop doing his thing. My son is online doing school and all kinds of things. And so, usually breakfast and lunch, we're kind of on our own, but we always come together for family dinners. Sometimes he cooks, sometimes I cook, but we're coming together for those. So plan your meals, sit down and plan different things to eat and try while you're getting your shopping list ready, getting ready to go shopping. I'm going tomorrow to do a big shop. It'll be my third kind of big shopping trip since quarantine or since social isolation. And, I'm really mindful of this. It's another thing, COVID-15. We've heard of freshman 15. When you start college, you gain 15 pounds. Well, a lot of us are not socially distancing from the refrigerator. So we're noticing that our jeans are starting to get a little snug. So be mindful as you plan your meals and what you're going to eat. You can actually even make it an activity. Look up different ethnic foods that you want to try. Look up different recipes and dishes that are outside of your norm. Place settings, set the table. And you know what? I understand that some of you are living alone, and taking meals alone can be an especially lonely time. But you deserve to be able to have a nice place to sit and have a meal. And, maybe you want to read a book while you're doing that. And maybe, if you don't have a pet to sit with you, I'm not suggesting you put your dog at the table, although some people can and do, no judgments. But I'm just saying, don't eat in front of the TV. Be mindful of what you're putting into your body and how you're doing that. Prep snacks. I know I'm a bad emotional eater, or sometimes if I get distracted, I'll get so hungry that I just grab whatever just to fill the emptiness. So if I prep snacks, healthy snacks, I'm going to consume those snacks. And notice, when you're chewing and you're breathing and you're putting down your fork, notice the flavor and texture of your food. Check your emotions. So what are you thinking about while you're eating? Are you thinking about your to-do list? Are you thinking about that jerk that cut you off in traffic? Just be mindful and check your emotions. Try not to think about negative things while you're eating, and even while you're cooking. I believe that the thought, like, angry people make angry food. And so you want to kind of be mindful and happy, and maybe put on some music and get in the groove while you're preparing your meals. Even that can make a difference. Next slide. I have a colleague, her name is Katrina. Neurological nutrition is her business, and she studies under Dr. Carolyn Leaf as well. And she shared these just simple little foods with me that are brain boosting foods and mood boosting foods. So turkey, we know that the tryptophan tryptophan, is that amino acid that requires and produces serotonin, that feel-good hormone. We often know that with turkey dinners we get kind of sleepy after, but it also can reduce depression symptoms. Pumpkin seeds, they're loaded with zinc to aid in stress reduction. They balance your mood and immunity. So we should be having lots of pumpkin seeds these days. You can put them in trail mix or a salad topper. I like to add them to my oatmeal or put them on top of my cereal. Parsley, that green stuff that's on the side of the plate that most of us end up throwing out, or I didn't know that was a stress-busting herb. I know it also aids digestion, so it's best at the end of the meal. But yeah, some parsley, and you can actually put it in your cooking as well, right in the dishes. Swiss chard, it's not only delicious, it's rich in magnesium and soothes the nerves and de-stresses the body. Yeah, magnesium is an anti-stress mineral. Who knew? Shiitake mushrooms, they reduce psychological and psychosocial anxiety. Asparagus, yeah, asparagus balances mood, supports sleep cycles, and calms anxiety. And you can eat asparagus raw with dip. It's really quite delicious. Next slide. So I said I was going to talk about spiritual health as well. And I am, but briefly. Because spirituality is a deeply personal thing. But some of the ways to acknowledge and care for your spiritual health are through prayer, meditation, to read scripture, smudging. Sage, when you burn sage, it's actually a natural disinfectant and can kill up to 94% of airborne bacteria. It's also said to improve intuition. So if you're going to go into a period of prayer and meditation, smudging some sage is a great way to not only clean your space, but to clean your mind and open it up. Fellowship, getting together with people like-minded, people with your faith. Nature. Someone said in the chat that getting in nature. I know I feel closest to Creator when I'm in nature. It's my the forest actually is my happy place. Get quiet and just hear that still small voice. Journal. Again, you can journal your prayers. You can journal scripture. When you journal things, it gives them more power. Practice gratitude. I started a gratitude journal in February. And every morning when I get up, I write down 5 things I'm grateful for. And I could write more, but I write 5 things every day. And usually I'm a very relational person. So usually it's, the relationships in my life or my family. But sometimes, it depends on what I'm thinking about. This morning, I wrote down hot and cold running water on demand. We are so privileged in this part of the world. And there's a lot of places in the world that don't have that really simple thing. So be grateful for it and try not to take these things for granted. Practice visualization, guided meditation. It's just some ways to pay attention to your spirituality. Yeah, that's true. I never thought about that. You're right. Some of our more remote places just here in Canada don't have access to clean water and hot and cold water on demand. Yeah, that's right. Forgive me. I wasn't thinking about that. I forget sometimes. So also, that's a great reminder. Next slide, please, Renee. So these are just some resources. These are mental health resources. Notmyselftoday.ca. I'm just going to read them out in case there's anyone who is visually impaired here today and using aids for that. So the Mental Health Commission of Canada, yourlifecounts.org, suicideprevention.ca, anxietypanicsupport.com. mdsc.ca. So that's the Mood Disorder Society of Canada. These are just some resources if you're feeling stressed. Next slide. Now I'm going to try to put this, I put it on my clipboard. I'm going to try to put the link to this. There it goes. Yeah. Okay. The link to this in the chat, because this was just such a neat little thing. And I know it's not really easy to read, but it was a list of 100 things to do while stuck at home social distancing. And some of this stuff is just so neat. I'm not going to read it out. I'll let you guys do that on your own, but there's some really great ideas in there. And again, like I said, I did put the link in the chat. So I only copied the first 36 in here, but there are 100 of them. And some of them are great to do on your own or with friends. And some of them are great to do with your kids who may be at home right now, kind of getting on your nerves. So we're almost, we're getting to the end of our time, and I really want to do a guided visualization with you guys. It's the first time I've ever facilitated one. I've participated in lots, but I really wanted to get to that. So next slide. Renee, next slide, please. Did I freeze? Can you hear me? There we go. I'm not sure. Anyway, you know what? The next slide was just some tips on how to self-isolate. I think most of us are probably pretty well versed in that. Some of them were just related to staying at home, limit the number of visitors in your home, only have visitors that you must see and keep the visit short, visit outside if you can, avoid contact with others as much as possible, keep distance, cover your coughs or sneezes. I mean, most of these we know about. Wash your hands. I'm not sure if Renee's able to bring up the next slides or not, but that's okay. Yeah, okay, so that's the one I just read. The next one has my contact information on it. I'm not going to take questions right now because I really want to do this guided visualization with you guys. And I will certainly read through the chat and we can do questions afterwards if we have time. But for now, I would just ask you to keep an open mind and do this with me. And that includes you, Renee, because you said you never did one. So here we go. So I just ask you all to get comfortable in your chairs. Again, put your knees on your lap or put them on the arms of the chair, or your knees, sorry, your arms on the arms of the chair, or rest them on your knees, on your lap. And just feel yourself supported in the seat. Feel your back supported. Rest into that. Drop your tongue from the roof of your mouth. And we'll practice 2 of those deep sighing breaths. Now, we're going to go for a stroll. So I want you to stroll wherever it is that you love to be. Maybe it's another country. Maybe it's the forest. Maybe it's the beach. I just want you to just go for a walk, just a leisurely stroll in your mind. I forgot to tell you to close your eyes, but your eyes are closed. You're visualizing. Pay attention to the sounds that you may hear. Maybe there's birds chirping. Maybe there's a babbling brook nearby. Maybe you hear squirrels or other little forest animals. Maybe there's fish jumping, flies buzzing. Wherever you are, all is well, and you're just going for a stroll. Up ahead, you see a place to sit down. It might be up against a tree. It might be a warm rock in the sun. It might be a bench or a comfy chair. But you go there and you sit and you rest. And you see someone walking towards you, taking their time. They're smiling. And this person you recognize walking towards you is your higher self. It's someone who's farther along the journey than you are right now. And it's you. And you come together and you embrace. They may sit down beside you. And they have a message for you. Maybe it's an ancestor and not your higher self, but they have a message for you. They're ahead of you, so they already know that everything is all worked out. And I just want you to take a moment and hear what it is they have to say to you. And accept that and settle it deep into your soul. And you hear a noise and you see there's someone else approaching. And it's your younger you, your little girl or little boy you. And they come to where you are. They're so happy to see you. And maybe they jump up on your lap, and maybe they just sit down beside you. But they also have something they want you to know. Or maybe you have a question for them that you want to ask them. Ask your younger self if there's something they want you to know. Be kind and gentle to that younger self. Now you stand, you all stand together and you hold hands and you embrace. And then you just take that young you and you just tuck it into your heart, that young you, and you just bring that and the higher version of you, and you just embrace them and bring them into your being with gratitude and love. And then you head back down the path the way you came. And this time you come to a meadow, an opening. There may be butterflies in the meadow. The sun is shining, it's warm. And this is where you enter the meadow and you play. That might mean that you lay on your back and watch the fluffy white clouds. It may mean that you fly. It's a visualization. You can do whatever you want, but you play. Maybe there's a unicorn that you want to ride. Maybe you're flying a kite. Maybe you're doing cartwheels. But you just take some time and let your spirit play. Maybe you're picking daisies. And then when you're ready, come back to your body. Wiggle your fingers. Wiggle your toes. Take a deep breath. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Now, I know that was probably really weird for some of you, and maybe some of you really loved it. I know the first time I did it, when we got to the meadow to play, I didn't have a clue what to do with myself. It was just one of those foreign concepts. And I think sometimes as adults, we sometimes forget how to play. And it's important. I ended up doing cartwheels. I couldn't do a cartwheel in real life to save my life, but when I was in my visualization, I ended up doing cartwheels and riding a Pegasus. So there you go. There are no limits. So we have a few minutes left. Yeah, we have 7 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions or anything they'd love to share, anything that they're finding great success with self-care, or any feedback, please let me know. Yes.
Well, there were a few questions before that I just want to bring back. So one of them was how to support a coworker who is struggling with mental health. Like how concretely do it? You have some.
How to support a coworker? Well,
Yeah.
have they divulged to the? Can they unmute and I can ask? We can
Please
have a
feel free to
conversation.
unmute. I can't remember who the person was to, but
Because I'm just wondering if they've divulged that they're struggling with their mental health, or it's just a suspicion at this point.
please, if you want to elaborate on your question.
That's okay. You know what? Maybe they might be gone, or they might not want to share. So there's a couple ways to do this, and it's a coworker. So, the best way to do that is just to be a supportive friend, but don't forget to set your boundaries, right? You have to maintain your boundaries, and you have to also realize sometimes in this work, it's super hard because the only person we can control is ourselves. And we, a lot of us are people, heart-centered people, servers. So we want to fix the world, and we can't. You can't push someone outside of what they're willing to do for themselves, but you can certainly let them know that you care about them, that you're there for them, and that you will support them any way they can. Sometimes that means that you share resources with them, like some of those mental health resources that were in the slide. Sometimes that might mean that you just listen if they are in a mood to talk. And sometimes that just means that you're there for crisis if they have a crisis. But if they become suicidal and a danger to themselves or others, sometimes you have to make the call and get them the help to keep safe. So it's really, it's all over the board depending on where they're at.
Mm-hmm. So feel free if you want to follow up on your question or you have a new one, please, you can unmute yourself or put your hand up and we can help you unmute. There was another question about self-care. And so DB asked if if self-care counts also as releasing a toxic relationship that no longer serves you greater good. Sometimes people feel like tied to a friendship or a mentorship as a moral obligation. So is self-care also releasing that?
Yes, it absolutely is. And it may not necessarily mean that you have to completely end that relationship, but it comes back to you setting your boundaries, right? So set your boundaries, communicate your boundaries. It can be really difficult if it's someone that you've had a relationship with ongoing and they've crossed those boundaries again and again and again. But at least if you talk to them and tell them what you're feeling, remember you use I language. I feel this way when you blank. So there are no wrong feelings. Nobody can take what you're feeling away from you. So it really comes down to that conversation piece and having that open dialogue. I have taken some training from people who delve into this a lot more, and what they have done, and this was actually within a family where their own child was really being disruptive and dangerous and potentially violent and threatening. So, you know, they would say, I feel this when you do that. And if you do that, I am going to do this. So it's basically setting up that boundary and name the thing. You know, it might be, I feel threatened when you shake your finger and become really angry and are in my face. And if you do that, I am going to leave. And so be specific, name that. And then, you know, what that does is it takes the decision away from you. You've told them how you feel, what their behavior is, and what your action is going to be in response to that behavior. And then that takes the onus off of you and puts the responsibility on them to control that behavior that you've already verbalized is a problem. Now, if you're talking about power relationships, I mean, if you're talking about domestic violence or something like that, that's a whole other convoluted, really complex issue that we could do a whole other session about, quite frankly. But yeah, it's about naming that behavior, communicating that, and then letting them be responsible for their response to that. I hope that answered your question.
So we have 1 more minute, perhaps we can fit one more question. Thank you.
Aw. Thank you for that feedback. That's wonderful.
Good. So if we have no other questions or comments, I want to thank you, Ruth Ann, on behalf of Writing Relations and JHC and all of us here today for this wonderful presentation. And yeah, thank you. I think we learned a lot in these 2 sessions.
Wonderful. It was a real pleasure for me. It was a great group. Thank you so much for being engaging and playing along. I really appreciate that.
Thanks.